And now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Meredith Milton, who will moderate the panel discussion. Come on up, Meredith. Let me tell you about Meredith. She's a creative consultant to Rewrite the Future. She's also a film producer and a former studio executive with 2 decades at Searchlight Pictures, Lionsgate, and Summit Entertainment. Meredith, over to you.
So we have a really great panel for you tonight. We have Meehan Crist, who's here in the room with us. You want to come on up, Meehan? And then we have Miguel Arteta and Julia Hart, who will be joining us momentarily via Zoom from Los Angeles. So Meehan is an author and writer in residence at Columbia. Her upcoming book is entitled, Is It Okay to Have a Child? A provocative question with which humanity is really just beginning to grapple. She's also the host of Convergence, which is a live show and a podcast about the future. Julia Hart is a director and writer and a Columbia alum, I will add. She recently directed Hollywood Stargirl for Disney Plus and I'm Your Woman for Amazon Studios. Her film Fast Color, which we'll be focusing on tonight, features a multi-generational family of women who possess special powers. And as a result of these differences, they must live apart from society because they don't want to end up lab rats for a government and a scientific community that they feel they cannot trust. Miguel Arteta is the director of Cedar Rapids and Chuck and Buck and an executive producer on HBO's series Enlightened, just to name a few. His film BEATRIZ at Dinner, which we will also be focusing on tonight, is the story of a woman whose love for all creatures has shaped the course of her life. She is also an immigrant who finds herself breaking bread with a man who is extractive capitalism and white colonialism incarnate. So we're going to show you 2 clips that we've put together from each of these movies, just for those of you who haven't seen them or maybe haven't seen them recently. I think we touched on this earlier and you touched on it, David. One of the things that I think that the entertainment community in general and all of us, I think, as people who think about stories and the stories that we tell are reckoning with is finding the language to tell these stories. And I think the thing that I love so much about BEATRIZ at Dinner and about Fast Color is that in very different ways, they're kind of finding the language to do that and integrating it emotionally into character. And also in the case of Julia's movie, Fast Color, bringing it into a movie that fits a very kind of commercial structure that I think if you've seen the film, you recognize, but integrating it in a way that's really grounded and kind of organic, where you can see, there could be a Marvel movie that has the structure of Julia's movie. So anyway, I think in the way that it integrates climate. So I'm excited for you guys to watch these.
No, seriously, come. I'm going to be by myself all day stuck at the lodge with little kids and Brittany.
Unfortunately, I work.
Where's Doug gonna be?
Oh, he'll be gone all day with Jack and Calvin hunting.
Hunting shit.
Yeah, it's Africa, right?
What are you hunting?
No, don't go into it.
You brought it up.
Okay, well, it's true, though, what they say. Those animals would basically be gone if it wasn't for the hunting, because it's very important to the economy. It keeps the parks going.
I have had all the rushes there are. Everyone. I've been to the buffet of life. I've tasted everything. And I'm telling you, being in Africa, okay, where all the species originated, everyone, including us, going out into the wild when it's still dark, it's quiet, except for these strange prehistoric sounds, and waiting for some beast to emerge out of the bush. There's no bigger rush.
I bet.
There's no better high, not sex, not drugs, not money. And facing that creature down and looking in its eyes and taking it. I don't consider it murder. I don't. It is a killing, obviously, but it's just this deep, primal thing. It's like this original dance of man and beast, man and nature, the struggle for survival. It's very pure. Not to get too airy-fairy.
Yeah. I just can't imagine doing it myself.
What kind of beast?
Huh?
What are you hunting this time?
Let's just say big game.
Well, come on, tell us.
No, let's not get into it. Some people can't handle it.
And let me just show you a picture from our last trip.
Oh, God.
Hang on. And where is it? Here. Here. There you go.
Wow. You shot that.
Holy fuck. That thing is massive.
Yeah. Maybe 10 yards from me, too.
Don't look at that, Kathy.
I'm not going to.
Oh my God.
Cost me a fortune for that one. Almost didn't get it either. Yeah, we knew it was out there, but it took us about 10 hours to find it. Hunting is all about patience. We had to stalk it for like all day, and suddenly, out of nowhere. So you believe in fate, huh?
Yes.
So do I. I think we all have a destiny to manifest. And if we don't, it hurts the soul. If the brass ring is there, there's a reason. And if we don't grab it, we regret it for the rest of our lives.
I think that's right.
I always felt that my fate was to heal people. And that's what I've tried to do. But there's so many sick people. Every day more come. They have cancer. They are dying. It's like a war. And I'm just a nurse in the middle of a battlefield. It's too much. I'm tired.
But hasn't cancer gotten more treatable? It has. Just look at Tara.
Good time to have cancer.
Dog, you think killing is hard, huh? You wait in the bushes, the animal might outrun you or charge you. It's not easy to get your shot, Try healing something. That is hard. That requires patience. You can break something in 2 seconds. But it can take forever to fix it. A lifetime, generations. That's why we have to be careful on this earth and gentle.
Sounds like you have a pretty tough job.
Yes, and there are moments where I think, instead of trying to heal all these people, it'd be better just to find the source of all this suffering. Destroy the source, you know?
What's the source? What, you think I'm the source?
She doesn't think that.
I think she does. You give me too much credit.
What I think is all your pleasures are built on others' pain.
Oh, that's bullshit.
Look, I'm a big boy, okay? Listen, honey. I think you have a great depth of feeling that you project onto the world. But to be honest, the world doesn't need your feelings. It needs jobs. It needs money. It needs what I
The
do.
world doesn't need you. No. The world has more than enough of you.
Doug is a great philanthropist.
Shut up, Kathy. There is another type of cancer that is killing this earth, dog. The world is dying. You do see that. Or are you blind?
The problem is there's just too many people. That's the problem. There's just way too many people.
You think that you can hide up here behind these gates and that everything is gonna be all right? No. It's coming for you.
What the fuck is going on?
Okay, that's enough.
It will touch you.
You're done. Come on.
The world's gonna die. I can feel it coming. We knew this would happen, that sooner or later, man's reckless behavior would catch up with us. 8 years since the last drop of rain, and no one knows what to do except raise the price of water. The well's dried up. We can't grow our own food anymore. It's gotten harder for us to stay in hiding. And I think about Ruth. I always think about Ruth. How does she survive out there on her own, as broken as she is?
Take your daughter and get under the desk.
What are you talking about?
Stay away from the windows. And cover her head.
Hello? Are you there? What's going on? Are you okay?
I'm a scientist, okay? I sit in a room all day, I'm collecting data. Getting her was supposed to be Joe's job, not mine.
Yeah, well, see, Bill, that's precisely the point. You had her and you lost her. They're running out of patience.
We have never been this close before. You have to make them understand. You saw our research, right? This woman can cause tectonic plates to shift, plates that have never moved before. Do you realize what that means? She can affect the energy of the Earth. And they're running out of patience because I needed backup?
Bo told me to. What? What is it?
So each of our panelists' work sits squarely in the intersection between the personal and the global. And obviously our goal at Rewrite the Future is to help storytellers translate climate change, which is an enormous, sometimes overwhelming, sweeping global phenomenon, into something that feels tangible and personal and immediate. So we're really excited to have all three of them here tonight. And I do want to have one content warning, which is that we're going to discuss suicide in the panel because it comes up in one of the films. So I just wanted to make sure to point that out to all of you. If any of you are thinking about suicide or have a friend who is, please reach out for help. You can call 988. So, Meehan, I'll begin with you. You've written extensively about this question, is it okay to have a child? And I'm wondering if you could tell us how you go about connecting the science of climate change with the decisions of daily life.
Yeah, I think it's a really great question. This, how do we move from the scale of the global to the scale of the intimate? Like, where do you find those points of connection? I think for me that it starts with listening, right? Where are people saying that they are concerned? What are people saying they are experiencing? What are they feeling in their bodies, right? What are what loss have they experienced? Where do they experience joy? And if you listen, you can start to hear these places of connection because, as Daniel was saying before, like it's here, it's already here. We're all living inside of it. There's a very slow unfolding catastrophe that is happening at different timescales and across different geographies, but it's here. So for me, around the time that my son was born, I had been tracking this, what I thought was sort of worrisome discourse among scientists and also among in the media about children and about climate change and children. And I don't know if you remember, Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez sort of posed this question to her many, many Instagram followers at one point in an Instagram live feed. And like the media briefly exploded, and it was like every bad take you could think of on like why you should or should not have children. And it just felt like there was this nerve that was there. And I was also talking to friends of mine who were considering, you know, bringing a biological child into the world and really struggling even to have conversations about it. It was like we completely lacked the language to be able to articulate what we were thinking or feeling or concerned about. And so for me, that just felt like a space where something was already happening, and like I wanted to help catch the rest of us up because it, like the currents were already flowing. And I think for me, it also means listening, you know, to myself and my own experiences. So because I write about climate and because I was, you know, pregnant and having a child, for me, the experience of being pregnant and having a child was inextricably wound up in the sort of ongoing revelations about ecological catastrophe. So, yeah, so for me, it's just like finding that place where it already exists, where the connection is already there. And I should say, like, for me, it's kind of a cheeky question. Like, I actually don't think that should like, is it okay to have a child is actually the right question, but it allowed me to start at a place where I felt like I could meet a lot of people where they were already, and then move from there into, you know, discussions of like ecofascism and the rise of the far right and, you know, sort of climate science and all the other things that I think about and wanted to talk about. But you can't just like start with ecofascism, right? So I wanted to like start at a place where it was like, we're all here in the same room together, right? Some people have some thoughts and feelings about this, right? Let's go and like see where this takes us.
Yeah, no, I think it's really true. I mean, it's a question that I think a lot of people confront, you know, at some point in their lives, and you have to kind of wrestle with. And I think, you know, I have children, and one of the things that I think about all the time is, you know, they're going to live in a world that I can sort of imagine, sort of, we don't know what it's going to consist of, and, you know, what is life going to be like for them in that world, and how do you go about equipping them emotionally to cope with what they're going to live through, and you know, are there narratives that we can build that role model like the kind of grit that they're going to need, and the kind of determination in the face of an obstacle that seems insurmountable. And I think, you know, and I think that that's a really, it's a tough thing to reckon with. And actually, I think, you know, Julia, your film, Fast Color, you know, what I love so much about Beau and Ruth is that they, you know, the choice that they made when they both had children was one that involved looking forward and knowing that they had special powers themselves that were burdens for them. And they nevertheless had children in spite of the fact that there was this kind of unknowable, inevitably complicated future awaiting them. And I'm curious, you know, how did you arrive at that place of making that choice for your characters?
Hi, everyone. I, you know, much like you, Meehan, I am a mother. I have a 4-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I really like making movies, but they're my everything. And you know, I very much wanted to explore the allegory around what we're all facing, which is their future and the life that we've brought them into and the planet that we've brought them into. And so that was definitely the jumping off point for me in Ruth and Beau's stories, which is interesting because Beau falls in love when she's young and gets pregnant when she's young. And I think that love is what encourages her, that in spite of the gifts / burdens that she was born with, maybe it'll be better for her child. And then Ruth, an addict, very much not sober and really struggling, became pregnant and, ultimately comes home seeking her mother's help, but also has, these gifts / burdens. And I think that, that's what we all have. We don't have superpowers that I know of, but we all have this gift / burden of this earth that is beautiful, and we're destroying it, and it still manages to be beautiful, and life still manages to be beautiful at the same time that it's ugly. And so that was definitely, where I drew inspiration from to tell the story of Fast Color.
Thank you. And Miguel, I'm curious, so, in Beatriz at Dinner, you made a really extraordinary choice of taking Beatrice and setting her, in this really sort of ultra wealthy, gated community, surrounded by a degree of opulence that most people who live on planet Earth obviously will never experience. And I'm curious how you arrived at that choice, and, how you felt it played out in the movie.
Hi. Mike White wrote this movie very quickly around the time that Cecil the Lion had been shot by the American dentist. Many of you must remember that. And he was so incised, so angry. He didn't, he wanted to tell a story that would deal with like our feelings in the face of people who are totally insensitive to this planet and to life on the planet, and so I think the story was born out of that, and he thought about putting the character Beatriz and setting this slow burn against this other character that represents everything that was infuriating him. And I think it was a great idea. I mean, I immediately reacted because it's so great to see these 2 points of view trapped. When you're at a dinner party, you're a little bit trapped. So it was a great way to set them off against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Both of your films also, I think, in really interesting ways deal with the intersection of environmental destruction and race. And I wonder if you could tell us, a little bit about what you were trying to say when you chose to combine those two topics in your stories. And why don't you go, Julia? Why don't you go first, and then Miguel? I'd be curious to hear.
I mean, as David was saying, and as I imagine everyone in this room knows, all of the catastrophes that are currently befalling humankind are much worse for people of color than they are for white people. And so this idea of this very special, very sought after family of Black women with these superpowers that were being hunted and had to go into hiding in order to survive. And as they do, the world is also collapsing around them and all of the white men who are hunting them. And we called it like pre-apocalypse. It wasn't a Mad Max post-apocalyptic movie. It was a little bit closer to home, and I found that really exciting as a storyteller and also really terrifying as a human to be exploring something that felt so close to where we made this movie a few years ago, and it's extraordinary. I think we made it in 2016, 2017, how much worse it is even just a few years later than it was when we made it. But this idea that their lives are that much more difficult and that much more destroyed by climate change than the white people in their contemporary space, but also that they are ultimately the ones who find the solutions.
I love it. All right, Miguel.
For our story, we wanted to tell the story of a Latina woman that had been the place where she grew up, which was filled with nature. It was a small village, has been developed and destroyed by, she thinks, the man that she confronts at dinner. And I think that the idea was to show how one of the big issues is how we devalue life of animals and people. And unfortunately, a lot of the people of color in developing countries are getting that treatment. And so, it was a great way to show like this developer who was like, at one point he's trying to develop a piece of land in California and says, we have to, we have some protesters talking about the bird nests and the birds, we have to go quickly, get rid of all the birds. And that way, they don't have a leg to stand on. And it's the same thing that they've done to Beatriz in her hometown when they created, they just pay people off, move them off, and created, a hotel there. So, our idea was to try to find out a very personal point of entry to tell the story of how to discuss the two sides of humanity that are kind of at war right now. The people who want to be more conscientious and the people that feel they have a point taking advantage of the world. And I think, like a great story is two sides of a good argument. And I think one of the reasons that climate stories and stories about social justice are difficult to tell is because we sort of feel like the other side has no leg to stand on whatsoever. And so what I really loved and reacted about Mike's writing in Beatriz at Dinner and about John Lithgow's performance, the way he embraced that dialogue, and is that he vocalized the other side's point of view. Like you saw in the clip, he tries to tell you, there's something primal about hunting. I don't consider it a murder. It's not like you can totally understand it, but he's trying to find a way to make us understand the other side. Or when he's saying, like there's an aggressive, at one point he tells her, there's an aggressive instinct in us where it's part of human nature. Like, let's just, more for me, less for you. Let me just live as well as I can. And if you don't follow that instinct, you're going to be unsatisfied. You're going to feel frustrated. And so what was really wonderful was to be able to articulate the other side in a way that I think was more understandable, I think that made the story in the script potent.
Yeah, I think that's a particularly important thing to do right now more than ever. I mean, obviously, you don't need to spend a lot of time talking about how divided the country is. We all know it. And I think that sometimes, that comes from, if you reinforce it too much in narrative, then you're just like worsening the divide, right? And I think that the more we can kind of reflect and humanize, the other side, whatever that other side may be in all narrative, it sort of changes the dynamic in any conversation. I think that's actually, like, quite honestly, my favorite thing about John Lithgow's performance in your movie is how, you can see him listening to Salma Hayek when she's talking, and it's like landing with him. Like there's a human in there. There's so much nuance to that. And I think, I think it's really wonderful. I agree with you.
Can I jump in on that?
Yeah, of course.
So I find that really interesting because I think there's often a failure of imagination to take other viewpoints seriously. I've read a lot of shooters' manifestos, and it's very easy to dismiss them as rambling and crazy, but there is a very deep and coherent logic that is very frightening, partly because it's so coherent. right? And like, I think that if you're not taking seriously the viewpoints of people that you profoundly disagree with, you're going to fail at countering them and putting forward narratives that actually deal with them seriously. So it's a really hard thing to do. So it was interesting to see that.
Yeah, no, I'll be the first to admit that I totally failed at that and just made the white men in my movie two-dimensional villains. I thought it was their chance. You know, women and people of color have been one and two-dimensional in supporting roles for most of the history of cinema. So, you know, it was their turn. What can I say?
David Strathairn had a very three-dimensional role in your movie. You had one.
Oh, yes, that's true. I'm totally forgetting about the extraordinary David Strathairn, who is like, oh my God, he's like as wonderful as you want him to be. And he is. Thank you for helping me out. Seeing the villainy guys was making me think about that. But yes, no, and you know, all of my movies are about women and have female protagonists, but I do always like to throw one guy in there who's not so bad, and that was David Strathairn in this time around.
It's also worth saying that at least in sort of my world is more in sort of like media and journalism and literature, and there are a lot of what I think are very unhelpful conversations about how to do this right. You know, what is the correct way to get the correct response from your audience such that we will, like, you know, push solutions forward and save the planet. And I think that that's just like misunderstands people because I think that, like, you know, like any sort of healthy ecosystem, a media ecosystem is going to have a multitude of approaches and going to have a multitude of ways of addressing the problem that are probably going to speak to different audiences. You know, there's a lot of like boosterism around kind of like solutions journalism, and we have to stay really positive and you have to like not make people feel bad. And, you know, some people feel really stressed out by that, by that approach, right? Yeah. And some people, when you say, you know what, we are currently living through a moment where we are navigating catastrophe. We're not going to solve climate change, but we can have a better catastrophe and we can have a really worse catastrophe. And some people are very motivated by that. Like, so I think this question of form or approach or storytelling, like, it's wide open. This is a wide open field to do this in many, many different kinds of ways, and not to get hung up on like, I have to do this the right way so that, you know, I save the world.
Yeah, I think that that's really true. And I think that, you know, what we talk about a lot in our work, you know, Daniel and me at Rewrite the Future is, you know, it's not so much about making movies that are like Day After Tomorrow that are, you know, really just super focused on like a laser on climate. It's like, for you guys as artists, think about the story that you're telling, and you're telling your own unique point of view on whatever it is that you've got to put out there into the world. And how does climate come into that organically? And what's your version of it? And I totally agree with you that kind of a, you know, like a weird Stepfordy version of like, we're all going to just pretend that we're fixing it and it's okay, like through gritted teeth, that, you're right, doesn't work. It doesn't feel authentic. And I think that we all know as consumers of entertainment that, you know, you reach for different narratives for different reasons. They have different effects on you emotionally. Sometimes I want to watch Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You know, sometimes I want to watch a Darren Aronofsky movie. Like, it really varies. And I think that there can be, you know, catharsis and healing and inspiration and lots of different things in lots of different movies. So it's in television shows, but yes.
Can I ask a question to the two of you? You have made movies that are very focused on climate and thinking about climate and ways to kind of narrativize this. I'm curious what you think about films or television that just don't do it at all, like don't touch climate at all, because at least for me at this point in sort of like the trajectory of world history, it feels like any piece of media, any sort of television show or film that does not at least address this, kind of like The Walls, right? Like what the speaker was saying in that clip before, is in the realm of science fiction, right? You can't do sort of dinner parties without climate anymore, even if the dinner party, it doesn't have to be about climate. So I'm curious, like, how do you feel when you watch films that just pretend it doesn't exist, or just sort of don't touch it?
So I think it's very difficult. We are living, all of us, in a state of trying to grasp how to feel good about having hope. And so I think sometimes a story that doesn't deal directly with climate, but deals with like, how do you have hope with dignity and without feeling like an idiot? Like, can be helpful to the mentality on how to change the world. But I think the biggest issue is that when you're dealing with climate change as a topic of a story, you're going to have to deal with deep anger. What's behind what we're talking about, the audiences are anxious about climate. What's behind anxiety is anger. There's a deep anger about the fact that we feel helpless, that these companies are playing us. When we hear where we're manipulated, we're angry. And so you're going to have to voice that anger. I mean, like, in some ways, I think that while we respond to Greta Thunberg's attitude is, it is her fire and anger at these people is the reason she's so popular. So if you're going to tell a story about climate change, you're going to have to try and bring that issue of anxiety and anger and lack of hope up, and find a way to tell people, what do you do with that? And I think like the best way to approach it, in my opinion, is to not let people, it's like the way people talk about your inner saboteur. You can't just pretend they're not there. You have to live with your inner saboteur. You also have to live with your inner anger and anxiety about climate. And you have to learn to live with it and say, okay, you're there, but you're not going to make me feel foolish or make me feel so depressed and so hopeless that I'm not going to act. So I think finding stories that teach people how to deal with their anger and live with it, make friends with your anger, are the ones that can create the most change.
It's such a good question, because I've done both. Part of that is period. I love period pieces, and what I love doing with period pieces, I wrote a movie set in the 1860s, and I wrote a movie set in the 1970s, and then obviously Fast Color is like adjacent. It's like future adjacent. But what I like about period pieces is that you're quite literally looking at them from now. Like, you can't, and I'm not interested in, the perfect minutia of the period and the perfect dialect. Like, I'm interested in period pieces through the lens of today in the 21st century. And so current, sort of taking the paranoia of the 1970s and imbuing that with where we're at today in terms of society and race and gender. This was a movie called I'm Your Woman that I made, that my husband and I wrote, that we made with Amazon. So I think that there's something valuable in that. But, I'll be honest, like, we made this movie at the height of the pandemic for Disney called Hollywood Stargirl, which was very much a piece of entertainment, but one that was about young people who are artists and hopeful. And we basically put into the narrative a guidebook for kids to know how to create their own content when they're inspired to create their own content, like the roadmap for doing so, like the people you need to gather and the tools that you need at the most basic level. And so I do think that there's space for things like that. But in general, for me, I can't really make anything that doesn't have some sort of conscience. Like that movie, as I said, was very much about a group of young people wanting to create something and showing a way in which young people can create something with access to the amount of homes that Disney Plus is in at this point. So, I think for me, sitting here tonight, I'm like, yes, we need to only be telling stories that involve some element of awareness of, and I love what you said about anger, Miguel. It's so true. Like, we need an invitation to express and deal with how angry we all feel and how anxious we all feel. But I also think that there are other noble stories to tell. But as you said, like, a dinner party, like the idea of a dinner party right now without somebody talking about it is ridiculous. But I think in general, for me, it's about a consciousness and a responsibility to tell stories that are aware of everything that's happening in all the different ways that they're happening right now that are not okay. And the other rule for my husband and I as storytellers, because we write and make movies together, is hope. There has to be some element of hope. I'm not interested in cynical storytelling at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. That's one of the things that I loved so much about your movie, actually, is that there is that, that real hope at the end.
Even if it's just a little bit.
Yeah.
Like you can show the darkness and you can express the anger, but I just need like a drop of hope somewhere in there.
Yeah, I totally agree. So, Meehan, one of the things that you, write about in your work, which I think, it's worth talking about tonight, is a lot of the narratives that the petroleum companies have put out there, and also a lot of the sort of scientific narratives around overpopulation, solutions to overpopulation. And those two things kind of interact with one another. But, I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the petroleum company, their sort of concerted PR campaign, which I think all of us have been recipients of for our entire lives, and the dangers of this and where it's kind of led us in terms of our cultural narrative and our understanding of the world.
So I'm actually genuinely curious. How many of you know that BP was the one that popularized the idea of the carbon footprint? Some of you. Okay, that's awesome. I'm so glad that some of you know that. So BP basically plucked this idea out of academic obscurity, and in 2005 they did this multi-year, I think, campaign that was about $100 million a year to popularize the idea of the carbon footprint. They even created a carbon footprint calculator, and since then these calculators have proliferated online. There are many, many ways that you can now measure your own carbon footprint. BP also, and I think since I reported on this, they actually have taken this down, but on their website, they have like a school resources section, like the section for kids. You should also know the fossil fuel companies have been in our middle schools and primary schools and high schools for decades. They are in there telling you what to think, right? Think about, Tomorrowland. Is it Tomorrowland? The Disneyland that's like all about like fossil fuels and how tomorrow is going to be great because we'll have a lot of energy for everything. Well, it's like that, but also in your science textbooks and also in your history textbooks. And also, so like we have been living in the world that fossil fuel corporations have created these narratives for a very, very long time. And this carbon footprint has been one of the most powerful. I wrote this down so I would get it right. This on their website, it's this part of the website targeted at school children. There's a carbon footprint toolkit that includes an interactive activity on the topic of carbon footprints and how energy use and climate change are connected, as well as a tool to calculate the carbon footprint of your school. So the effect that this has had and has been very effective to sort of displace responsibility for the climate crisis onto the individual consumer, right? This is a big part of the fossil fuel narrative. It's not us. We're just providing the thing that you are demanding of us. And therefore, it is your responsibility. Again, this is like the first thing is the deflection. The second thing is, therefore, it's your job to combat the climate crisis individually. This is up to you. And it's also done a really good job at helping to delay climate action. So I'm profoundly skeptical of the carbon footprint narrative. And I think you all should be too.
Yeah, no, it's sort of a horrifying thing when you think about it. And I think we talk about this a lot, obviously, because individuals, when they get together, can do extraordinary things. I mean, just this summer in California, obviously we had an enormous drought, and the LADWP, really got on it and told people, we're going to do all these things to you if you don't reduce your water use. And actually the city really did reduce its water use. It was kind of incredible that people, reassuring, frankly, that people reacted. So
yeah, and I think having a healthy skepticism is not the same thing as saying that personal actions don't matter.
Right.
I think they just don't matter the way that maybe we've been taught to think that they do.
Yeah.
They matter particularly in terms of something called social contagion, right? Which is sort of part of what we're all involved in here professionally. But that, it's been shown that if your neighbors, start, recycling or driving an electric car or something, it starts a conversation. And it, like, the idea of normalizing these things actually then wends its way down to the ballot box, sort of down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously, well, maybe not obviously, perhaps elections will not save us either. But it does mean something to change your own personal behavior. Also only if because it like allows you to try to get right with yourself in the world. That if you're trying to live your values and you have to sort of figure out what your worldview is, and you want to, if recycling makes you feel good, that's fine. You should also know that's not going to decarbonize the global economy.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that. And that's why they're encouraging you to recycle.
Right.
So it's sort of knowing what actions are for what purposes, I think, is important.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So, and that actually brings me, I think, to a really important point, to the sort of more sensitive part of this discussion, but something that, comes up in your movie, Miguel. The choice that Beatriz ultimately makes. I think that she is a character who we could all probably could never have imagined her taking someone else's life, but you do this wonderful thing in the movie where for a moment we really think that maybe she might and perhaps has. And then, of course, what ultimately happens is that she takes her own life. And I'm curious how you arrived at the place where you decided that that was going to be the end of her story.
Well, the truth is that Mike and I decided to shoot two endings. One where she really does kill John Lithgow, and one where she daydreams which is the current ending. We were trying to figure out how to make a bold statement, about human beings. And, we decided that her imagining, being able to express her anger in her imagination, and then leading her to total despair, realizing how useless that would be, and that she's tired and she just wants to go back to nature. Mike sees it as a positive, hopeful ending where she's going back to a pure place that doesn't exist anymore. And I sort of feel like it just is letting us, what is our scorecard right now as a species? It's not awesome, so there's a part of it, we're such an invasive species, and there's a part that it's just so depressing. I wanted to have a story that said, it's okay to have these feelings of complete despair, because we have them, and I'm not saying that that's the right answer or anything at all like that. I just wanted to tell a story that was different and told, sort of validated our anger and our sense of hopelessness.
I'm curious. Okay, so that was a total revelation to me. I didn't know that you guys shot two endings. I need to know what happened and how did you decide which one, what ultimately was in the movie? How did you decide what to use?
Well, we played them both among small audience of friends, and then Mike and I had lots of discussions on it. And it just came down to being like, what's the most honest, most honest way to put this forward, which is like, the truth is that, honestly, the terror that I feel inside about us humans being totally unwilling to deal with the future and deal with each other and deal with animals and life in this planet, there's something inherent in it must have been useful when we lived in small tribes that is just extremely cruel. And I don't know how to deal with it. If I'm honest, we all have to enjoy some delicious denial every day regarding this. But I think that, Mike and I both decided that was the more honest response. And in some ways, the way the movie would have more of an motivating impact for audiences.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I'm curious, one of the things that I found most interesting in your research on sort of overpopulation and the idea, there's this narrative that's out there that one of the biggest strains on the world is that there are too many people. And I'm curious if you could tell us more about, the dots that you've connected, Meehan, between this idea of, are we as humans, by continuing to, have children and populate the world, or, what are we perpetuating and where does that take us? And the sort of social theory that's arisen out of that idea.
Yeah, so the idea that population is the main driver or the primary driver of climate change is something that has sort of resurfaced in recent years. And by recent years, I mean, this goes back to like the 17 and 1800s. Like, people have been talking about this for a really long time. And in the 1970s, you had this kind of Paul Ehrlich population bomb, overpopulation panic, and that sort of subsided because we had the Green Revolution, which created all of these, basically fertilizers, and so we had tons of food, and we didn't all die in 1975. But the idea that biologically humans are like an invasive species on the planet is a profound misunderstanding of the relationships, the very complex relationships between the human organism and our technologies and the ecosystems in which we live and the structures that we build to live inside of. And I think that this kind of biological determinism is a very old idea that, humans are this way on the planet. So Thomas Malthus had this argument in the sort of, 1800s, that his argument was basically that poverty is inevitable. Because humans are always going to be eating sort of as much food as they possibly can up to the point of not having enough, and then there's going to be some kind of catastrophe, and then they'll eat a little bit more and then come back down. And like, food production goes up in a arithmetic kind of way, and population goes in this more sort of multiplicative way. And so we could never possibly have enough food on the planet, and so poverty is inevitable, and so you should give up on ever trying to have any social change. And there's no way to have a just society. It was a very bleak vision of society, and it was sort of brought up in relation to these very optimistic sort of Enlightenment ideas about the possibilities of sort of human rationality creating a just society for everyone. And he was really like, no, it's biologically not possible. Except the thing is, his biological argument was actually rooted in his deep Catholicism. So he was actually taking a teleological religious argument, putting it into biology. And then it turns out he was also using sort of new Scottish economists' sort of ideas about economy, which is sort of the beginning of capitalism, and putting that into his idea as well and stringing it all up. And then this all got inherited by Darwin. And Darwin comes up with this theory of like competition between species for resources. And this is the engine of, how species evolve. So that is a very robust and, useful theory. But it also basically claims that nature is a capitalist. Darwin was also really moved by these arguments from the Scottish economists who were really into this sort of new capitalist structure. And all of these ideas, basically these ideas from political economy and these religious ideas, got baked into a biological argument that we now live with, that humans are a scourge on the planet, there are too many of us, and it's not possible to have a just society, biologically. And so then the arguments that you sort of come up with from that position involve things like, well, unfortunately, it's usually the problem is other people, right? So then you start talking about who should and should not be having babies and why, and you veer very, very quickly into anti-humanism and ecofascism and all kinds of like really terrible arguments, and also just some like current American immigration policy. But this is like the water that we're swimming in. If the fossil fuel companies have given us certain narratives, then, science has also given us certain narratives. And to say that population is the thing that is driving climate change ignores the actual drivers of climate change. And it suggests solutions that involve biological solutions like having less human organisms, when the actual solutions need to be geared at the actual root causes, which are the extraction and burning of fossil fuels inside a globalized system and a world order that is a political and economic world order based on accumulation. That is killing us. And that we could change. Like this is the tiny place where I find hope. If it's biology, we're done, right? We're fucked. Sorry, I don't know if I can say that. Right, but if it's biology, then like, yeah, let's make our dystopian films and we're all gonna die and let's be done with it, right? But if there's something in the systems that we have built to put human organisms inside of, which were built by some people in the interest of some people and for the profit of some people over the vast majority of the other people, if we could change that, maybe we wouldn't kill ourselves. That to me is hopeful. I mean, I don't think it's likely that's going to happen like tomorrow, but the fact that it's possible, we haven't tried to live on this planet sustainably. We don't know if it's possible.
Yeah, and I think it might be, and I think that that's the thing that needs more exploration, sort of narratively. And I think that's, really, frankly, Julia, what I loved so much about the end of your movie is that it's really this kind of call to collective action, right? Like, go find the people who might be your allies and, like, get some stuff done. And I think that there's, like, an incredible realism to that, but also an incredible, like, inspiring hope. Right? And it shifts you completely out of this place of being like, all you have to do is reduce your individual carbon footprint. Like, no, there's so much more that we can all do. And it's just that they've been trying to distract us from what we can do for a really long time because it didn't help,
And all of this is like creeps into our most intimate decisions, right? You're talking about like, should I have a child or not with, this person or multiple people that I love and want to be in communion with in some way. And like, Thomas Malthus and Darwin and the fossil food companies are like up in there.
Yeah, it's a trick.
Right?
You guys, it's a trick. Don't fall for it. So I want to ask Julia and Miguel one more question because we have you guys gathered here tonight, and then I think we'll move into Q&A. But so Dorothy Fortenberry, who is one of our favorite collaborators at the NRDC, she likes to say when she's talking about telling climate stories that you can't go marching in and, say that you're going to make your TV show or your movie about climate. What you want to do is tell everybody you're making a sexy zombie movie and then make your climate story along the way. And I'm curious, Julia and Miguel, if you have any advice for our audience tonight about, the hurdles that you've overcome in your work or, places for them to go in their work. Julia, why don't you go first?
I did also want to respond to what Meehan was saying, and I loved in your, is it an essay? Is that the right?
Yeah, there's an essay.
Essay, yeah, which I loved, and it very much spoke to me and how I feel about all of this. Part of which is also that, like, for me, and I'll be honest, I don't know what this says about me. My decision in having children, I didn't even think about the carbon footprint. It was about them and their future and what kind of a life and quality of life they were going to have given what we've done to the planet. And so it's so fascinating to me, again, and it speaks to your sort of like the conspiracy angle of the carbon footprint being in and of itself a bit of a distraction that is something that we should think about with healthy skepticism. But for me, it's like, I look at them and I think about, what is their life going to be like? And something else I love that you said in your essay, or you wrote in your essay, is about how we don't know what it's going to be like. And this idea of a better catastrophe and a worse catastrophe, that like we have all of these ideas and predictions that are based on, healthy research and information, but also we don't know. But I just wanted to say that because I think it's so interesting in that conversation that it's so much about the carbon footprint and not about those children's futures that we've, that we've foisted on them.
Or the possibility that those children might potentially be living carbon neutral lives, and therefore they would not have a carbon footprint that you were morally responsible for.
And the geniuses who figure out all the solutions that we failed to. But anyway, sorry, Meredith, your question. Yeah, no, they are terrified of, I went in and pitched on, this is not about the climate, but I went in and pitched on, I won't say what, but beautiful essay was being adapted into a film about female trauma and recovery and rediscovery of the body after, surviving trauma. And I talked about that, and I talked about my own experience with trauma as a woman in the pitch, and I did not get the job. They want to make a rom-com where she's like having sex again, So I think it's really important to be honest about the version of the story that you want to tell, but also, and Daniel spoke about this in his intro, that it wants to be something that people want to watch. It wants to be entertaining. And so it's this very fine line of making sure you let them know that it's going to be a sexy zombie movie, but also like have this message underneath. But that is always the conversation. It's like the message has to be underneath, like we don't want to scare anybody with reality. But then there are a lot of really extraordinarily brave allies and advocates on the decision-making side of our industry who aren't afraid to tell those, to say the quiet part out loud and to tell those stories in a more robust, more direct way. So it's really about finding the partners and the companies and the studios that want to go there with you. For me, at the end of the day, like it's always about a project that I believe in, but really, and I think this is true of every industry, it's about who you're doing the project with at the end of the day. It's about finding good people who believe what you believe and want to tell the type of stories you want to tell in the way that you want to tell them.
My advice to people that want to try and make movies that help us be more conscious is to think about something that touches everyone, that can be attached to the idea of a personal story that will open people's eyes and make them more comfortable being conscious of and active and engaged in the world. But if you don't make a personal story that deals with something that touches all of us, you're probably going to not be able to get that movie made. So I think the difficulty is finding what is that thing that everybody can relate to, that everybody can say that's happened to me, and how you can connect that with making people feel like it's okay to be more conscious. And it's a challenge.
Yeah, it is. All right, so I think what we'd love to do now, thank you, all of you, this has been wonderful, is switch over to a Q&A. And I think, obviously our three panelists are here to answer any questions that you have. We also, if you have questions about the NRDC Storytelling Fellowship, we're happy to talk a bit more about that. And we also have Christina Lazaridis here, who can talk about the Sloan Grants, which, exist, as you're probably aware of them, hopefully, but to exist, to support storytelling about science and technology. So those exist as opportunities for you as well to help, fund your ongoing work in this space. I think we also have people on either side of the room who have microphones. So if you want to just raise your hand, if you've got a question, raise your hand, we'll toss you a mic, and then you're in the hot seat.
Hi, thank you all. Listening to you all speak, I think it's clarifying for me that something that's hard about writing about this is actually how to get the information in it. The part that's more academic. I'm thinking about your explanation of Darwin and that whole thing, and I'm like, that's brilliant. How do you put that in a movie? without just having somebody saying it. So I don't know, I'm wondering if you have thoughts on that.
I don't have to solve that problem. I just get to say the things I think are interesting. But I do think it has been interesting to me. My sort of natural inclination is in that direction anyway, right? As a writer, I'm like, I found out all this amazing stuff. Do you guys want to know about it? And like sometimes no, like, wow, that's a lot of information. And so I think that I have tried very hard to find ways to like titrate the facts and titrate the story, and also telling them as stories, right? Like I have a chapter in this book that I'm writing is like the story of Thomas Malthus. He's very interesting. He lived at an interesting, weird time when like the Little Ice Age was possibly being caused to some degree by like murder of indigenous people and burning of their lands in the United States, which killed so many trees and bushes and cleared off cover that like it made the weather different. I mean, like there's all kinds of ways to sort of use stories and also bring in the context in which these things are happening. Some people are really, really good at it. And my examples are all writers, right? Because that's just the brain that I use. But I think that to some degree for me, it's the like going back and forth and giving the reader finding what are narratives, because also intellectual stories and histories are narratives, right? There's all kinds of science writing that's like scientist discovers a thing. Here's how it happened. Like here was Tesla in his lab doing this thing. And like you're invested in the story of that person doing the thing, doing the work. But also I think intellectual histories can be narrative in their own way. And also I try to use my own experience where it seems necessary or appropriate. I think there's a difference between autobiographical writing and intimacy in writing. And so for example, in this essay that they were referencing that's called Is It Okay to Have a Child? At the end of it, I wrote the scene of giving birth. And I really didn't want to write that scene. It was like very private and very my own. But I got to this point in the essay where like it was the most honest thing I could do. It was like the most honest, raw, necessary thing to talk about. And I have had a lot of readers say that like this is why I could hear all the other things, right? Because I was going on this sort of journey through these things with this like living, breathing human who was gonna sort of be intimate with me in these ways. And that essay doesn't say anything about like my parents or my relationship with them or where I grew up or any of that kind of stuff, but like it lets you in some kind of vulnerable, intimate way. I don't know how that translates to film. I will send that to you too.
Yeah, would either of you like to weigh in on that one?
Well, I think it's exactly what you were just saying, Meehan, which is action. We all fall into the exposition trap because sometimes it's necessary. Like that voiceover that you heard in the beginning of the fast color clip, that was not in the script. We did not record that in production. That was in post after we had shown the movie to some people and people felt like they were just getting dropped in and they needed a little context for the world. And I think that's okay, the world of the movie. And I think that's okay. Like, I think it's okay that audiences sometimes, especially when, fast color takes place in a wholly different world. There's a lot of world building and a lot of rules to that world. And there's a lot of rules to how you tell stories when you're world building. And so, sometimes you do need that tool. And I think it did help audiences engage and get into the movie more easily. But to me, the more evocative things in fast color to tell me about the world are how you see, Ruth, when she checks into that motel, buys a jug of water. And the jug has clearly been used over and over again by many different people and refilled, and there's a line, and the water being filled to that line is a certain price, and it being filled all the way up is another price. And so even just showing the action of her buying that water and the interaction and the conversation about how much a half jug is and a whole jug, and it ultimately when we show the actions of that world, I think that's some of the clear ways that we can integrate the complexities of what's going on in that world. But then also sometimes you do need to rely a little bit on exposition, unfortunately.
Yeah, but I think that is a lot of the art, is taking these abstractions and making them tangible and small. I think a lot of the time it's in the details. Or it's, taking a really big social theory and imagining like, okay, well, what is that world? And how are you going to react to, what that world might be? And, I think that, like the Hunger Games is another sort of really interesting example, obviously dystopian, but, where you have characters who've gone in a deeply dark direction with the kind of social soup that they're swimming around in, and then you have Katniss in the middle of it, who's just like really, got a strong compass and navigating it, and I think that franchise in some ways is an expression of not the same theories that we're talking about here tonight, but like some version, of that survivalism and what are people made of. Yeah. Anyone else?
Yes, it is. Thank you all. That was really fascinating to be able to think with you on these questions. I think my question picks up on a similar topic about the kind of creative challenges of particularly the medium of film. It strikes me that Hollywood film in particular has historically done a good job at telling stories about individual heroes and tying them up neatly at the end, and climate stories really feel like they don't fit either of those patterns. So I'd be curious to know how you've grappled with that in the writer's room. And the second related question, I think, is, or thing, film often historically to me seems to have been thought about as a kind of escapism. You go to work and then come home and enjoy switching off with the show. So Julia, I loved your idea about sneaking in a kid's guidebook to action in a show, and I'd be curious to know whether you have other suggestions about ways to build in those resources or calls to action that go beyond just a title card at the end that says, for more information, visit whatever.org or something like that. Thanks.
I see what I do as a massive privilege. I get to tell stories and pay my bills with the money I make telling those stories. And I see having platforms, Fast Color is currently on Netflix. As I said, the 70s movie I made is on Amazon. And then the movie that you were referring to is on Disney Plus. And I always just think, I used to be a high school teacher. I was an English major at Columbia, and then I was a high school teacher for my first career before I started making movies. And I just always think about my students. I think about my own children, but I also think about my students and like, what do they need in their stories right now? What do they need to see? Who do they need to see? What do they need to hear? What do they need to know? And, it's a huge responsibility. You're given millions of dollars and access to millions of homes these days with these streaming services. And I take that very seriously, be it a story about the climate, or as I said, a story about a group of young artists who really want to make a movie but don't have the resources that I do to make that movie. So I made a movie about their limited resources and how they could still, tell their story anyway. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that there are probably a million important causes that you could find a creative way to get your point across to an audience, but I'm still working on what's next, but that's what I've done so far.
Miguel, did you want to add to that question, or should we move on to the next?
I thought that was a great answer. So here's the next question.
Thanks, Miguel.
This is really hard because we're inside the container we're in here is talking about Hollywood, right, and television shows and movies. And I think many of the stories that need to be told don't fit the vessels that you're talking about putting them into. And it's this conversation might have been happening sort of more and earlier, the past couple decades, I guess at least a decade now, in sort of literature and journalism. People getting frustrated with the shape of news stories and getting frustrated with the shape of magazine articles, like long-form magazine articles, because they're not the right shape for the story you're telling, right? I actually have a little part of my bookshelf that's dedicated to group biographies. If anyone has any good stories of group biographies, they're sort of biographies of a moment in time and all of the many people who were involved in sort of co-creating that moment, as opposed to the sort of great man of history narrative and baton passing. But it's really hard to write a group biography Hollywood film, Like maybe there are those. I don't think so. So you're really running up against the constraints of genre and sort of thinking about what genre you are working in and what those constraints are and where you can maybe break them or push them a little bit and like try something a little more experimental that might actually fit the story better. I think that I don't know how to solve this problem, but I think that the like Hollywood climate film is kind of like the record scratch goes on for me, and I'm like, oh man, that's really hard.
Yeah. No, I think it is challenging, but I think that there's also sort of tremendous opportunity in that, right? Like whenever you feel like there isn't a vessel for your story, but you know that the story matters, then you're like, well, then we got to go build that one.
Right,
like,
to make
and I
vessels.
think so that's where the creative opportunity lies. And I think that so much of what happens, I think, you know, Hollywood has a whole narrative about what stories work and what stories don't work. And, you know, that narrative changes when the stories come along that prove that maybe some of the stories that we thought we couldn't tell actually work and people love them and they embrace them. And, you know, and then there's a whole groundswell of movement in that direction. And so there is that opportunity always on lots of frontiers. All right. What do you think? Do we have time for one more question? Yeah?
Hi, thank you guys so much. I'm curious, kind of from a slightly different direction, maybe for you guys as directors, but also maybe for you as a writer and the limitations of just writing. What do you guys think are some of the most visually compelling aspects of climate change right now that you don't yet see in narrative TV or film? You know, as opposed to like, you know, dystopian visuals or anything like that.
All right. Who would like to go first?
I'll go first. I mean, to me, like I would like to see how climate change is already affecting, you know, underprivileged communities and underdeveloped countries. You know, I think that would be such a fertile thing that I would like to be able to see. And I think visually you can do that now, because so many communities are being affected. You know, look what happened in Pakistan. I mean, like to set a story in that situation would be incredible, very difficult, expensive to recreate, but they can do it with visual effects, and it could have a great impact.
I have sort of two suggestions. One is just a film that I'm thinking of that had very cool visuals in it. It's actually a documentary film, but it's by the director, her name's Brett Story, and she did a climate sort of documentary. I think it's called The Hottest August, and it's a very visually lyrical kind of film, but it's not like Forest on Fire. It's like, you know, Coney Island and like some hot kids playing in the sun, right? But like, it becomes very compelling because of everything that it's sort of juxtaposed with in this very, very hot August. So that's one thing. I think that there are really quotidian images that haven't been like explored. It doesn't have to be like ice storms and explosions. I think also watching films that are not made for American audiences to see how visual languages work outside of sort of art frame, literal frames of reference is really helpful. I just went to watched a series of short films that was curated by, she runs, I think, I'm going to get the name of the organization wrong, so I'm not going to try it. But they were all Arabic filmmakers, and the theme was sort of the ocean, the sea, and it was really compelling to see how many of these short films were actually about forced migrations, right? Those are climate films also, right? And talking about forced migrations because of economies collapsing and because of wars that are being fought, and like getting out of your sense of what the visual of climate is and think about what climate does and how you can, what that looks like for people maybe who are not middle Americans.
Yeah. Julia, sorry, did you have something to add?
Sure. You all always make me think about things as I'm listening to you. And you mentioning that movie, One Hot August, what was it called? The Hottest August. Makes me think about how, and this isn't a climate story, but how powerful the heat wave is in Do the Right Thing, and how much it is a character in the story, and the sweat and the experience and the way that the heat pushes their anger out even more for, the social injustice that's happening, just colliding with the intensity of the heat. And so even that becomes, it's so much a theme and a character, but also, Spike Lee made it a visual as well. And then I was thinking about all of, again, like going back to like visual details and cues. And I was talking about the water jugs in fast color, but also like one of the most interesting sets, I don't think this was in the clips at all, was the store, like the one store that's left. And, it was very eerie during the beginning of the pandemic, being a privileged person who lives in a place in California where stores are always, full of stuff, just all the shelves being empty, and that looking a lot like what, our pre-apocalyptic general store looked like in fast color, with just, what's left, because nothing is being packaged and sent anymore. And, what the shelves looked like in our own lives not that long ago, and probably will again.
Yeah, that's really.
I don't want to end on that note, though. We need a drop of hope before we wrap up.
It's still like that at my local pharmacy and grocery store. I don't know about you guys. Anyway, well, look, thank you guys. I think this has been a really great discussion. Thank you to all of you for coming here and asking great questions and listening to us. And look, obviously we're all around and like happy to talk about these things. And so please reach out. Daniel and I are very readily accessible. So if you guys are also thinking about your own work and want to talk about things, or, need resources in the climate space, one of the things that we do a lot in our work at the NRDC is consult on stories, obviously. And there are like 700, employees of the NRDC, experts in all sorts of things. Lots of really smart, awesome, interesting people with incredible stories that they can tell you about their work. So that could then go and be creative fodder for your own work. So we're happy to offer that resource to you too. But thank you. It's been lovely having you here.